worse. Nothing but junk mail and overdue bills to keep me company. Seems nobody wants to hire a real private dick anymore, a professional like me. A guy who does the detective work nobody else wants to do. A guy who wears hats and walks around in a black and white world. I began contemplating a more profitable line of work, like politics.
We are the show you want to know. It's time to talk to you.
All right, folks, good afternoon and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. I'm Joe Mangiacotti, and over the next hour, you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Lines open and available today. Behind the glass at HQ Flying the Board, he'll get you set up and into the studio for two-way talk and conversation. This is the July show, in essence, July 3rd, tomorrow, of course, being the celebration of the birthday of our country. And you'll get some replay programming and special programming, but I won't be back until Monday afternoon, folks. And our text line is running at 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. Text us like you would anything else. It appears on the screen in real time here in the studio. We try to work it into the conversation. Also, the station does stream 24/7 on the TuneIn app. So if you don't have that on your device, it literally takes seconds to download it, put it on your device. That means you can take us anywhere. You can tell Alexa to play WCRN, and she'll do that. No questions asked. Now, I stream my show either from the studios at WCRN or from the Cameo studios, and that's where I am today. So the Cameo cam is on, so you can actually watch and listen to us in the studio, either on Facebook or X, both the station Facebook page, my Facebook page, my X account, which you can follow me on social media, Joe Mangi Show, M-A-N-G-I, Joe Mangi Show, LinkedIn profile, and we do stream live to Rumble, as well as the station's Facebook page and YouTube channel. So welcome to the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN, Radio Central, Boston's home for common sense talk, and we're coming to you on this glorious 4th of July weekend. Today we celebrate, or tomorrow I should say, that we celebrate the birth of our great nation. 249 years since that fateful day of July 4th, 1776, when 56 brave patriots signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, defying a king to proclaim our God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes, to defy a king, an actual king that existed. You could say it was the original No King's Day. This was no mere document. It was a revolutionary stand for self-governance, a bold rejection of tyranny, and the spark that lit the flame of American freedom. We honor the sacrifices of those founders, from the battlefields of Lexington to the halls of Congress, who risked everything to build a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But what does independence mean today? Are we still that shining city on a hill? From Supreme Court battles to political showdowns. We're going to take a look at that and dive into it. What's at stake for America's future? You can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000, or a text line at 617-297-8388. You know, your voice fuels this 4th of July celebration. So let's talk some freedom, folks, right here. Also coming up a little later in the show, Tom Donelson, who will join us. You know Tom Donelson from the Donelson Files, also a fellow senior fellow at the Frontiers of Freedom Institute, where I too am a senior fellow. He'll jump on for a little while as we look at what's on the horizon here on this 4th of July. As you heard going into the show, and I was watching a little bit before we came on air, is, yes, Hakeem Jeffries is still talking. Didn't he just do like 28 hours or something and trying to do a filibuster? Sometimes you've got to read the room, Jeffries. You really do. So, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries delivered a 6-hour speech last year on the day a vote on Trump's major tax and spending bill, the one that I call 3XB, right? The Big Beautiful Bill Act. He's using the House as, well, a magic minute rule, basically. He extended his 60-second speaking privileges to highlight the Democratic opposition. Although again, the left, they throw these things out there that are inaccurate and not quite truthful. And the Republicans, quite frankly, aren't very good at combating that. And aren't very good at pointing out that when they say it's going to cut Medicaid or eliminate SNAP or whatever it's going to be, right? So he's on there saying, hey, the bill's going to cut Medicaid and SNAP, criticizing an assault on the Healthcare Act of the American people. He called the bill one big ugly bill, arguing it harms vulnerable Americans while favoring tax breaks for the wealthy. They love that line. They really do. But let's talk about the tax in a second. But the other things, the bill doesn't cut this for people who are eligible for it. The bill is trying to address the fraud, the corruption that's in all of this, Medicaid, SNAP. When you've got non-American citizens and people who are not here legally tapping into those safety nets in those programs that are supposed to be for those American citizens, where either they and or their families have paid into this system. There's a thing between your AOC posted out there, and I'll get into this a little bit. Not $1 has gone to anybody on these following things, Medicaid and so forth. Medicaid and Medicare is one of the largest fraud-driven types of programs that we have. Always has been. I've said this over and over again. It makes its way into pop culture. It makes its way into TV shows all the time because it's so rampant and so well known. Now, the 940-page bill, this Republican bill, includes these tax cuts, and more accurately, too. It preserves the original Trump tax cuts in his first term that actually resulted in actual tax relief for the middle class and poor. And that ended up giving us record revenues. If the economy is healthy, if the economy is strong, if people are working, revenues go up. We do not have a revenue issue in this country, folks. We have a spending issue. It increased this bill will increase funding for defense and immigration enforcement. Although it's amazing that the record number or record reduction in illegal crossings, the 0 people this past month being released into the country, even asylum requests are down, and not one new law was passed. It was just a new president letting the bureaus, the agencies, do what the law already says. Just enforce our immigration laws that have been on the books for years. It's cliche now, but we didn't need new law. We just needed a new president. And since we got that, the border is much more under control. It also has reductions to some of these programs, but these reductions are targeted and are supposed to take off because every person who taps in, say, to SNAP, right, commonly known as food stamps, it's taking out of that pool for people who actually legally are entitled to it. So these reductions, these things are targeting the people who are on there illegally, who aren't entitled to those safety net programs. And they're trying to say, oh, all these Americans are going to lose health insurance. Again, we're back to who's going to lose them? People that shouldn't be on them. And if you have people, and I've always drawn this distinction, folks, right? I've made that point between SSI and SSDI. And when you've got somebody who's on either one of these programs and they're able-bodied, healthy Americans, why are they collecting a check? We have welfare programs to bridge them over to that. But for elderly, children, in disability, those are those programs and safety nets that are in there. And what is the Republican response? Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson, he says he has secured enough GOP votes to advance the bill after overnight negotiations, expressing confidence in its passage. And the word is President Trump, who is a very good whip at this stuff, has been cutting deals and making phone calls, working it, as they say. Now, Johnson is planning to get on there when Hakeem's gives up the floor for a shorter speech following Jeffries, with a vote expected very soon after that. Now, Jeffries' speech, well, it's not a Senate-style filibuster. It does leverage a House tradition, allowing leaders unlimited speaking time. And the record for the longest House speech is 8 hours and 32 minutes. That was set by former Speaker McCarthy in 2021. And what is at stake here? Well, Trump wanted to sign this by July 4th. That was a deadline, which has no meaning other than symbolic. And other is something that he wanted to do, right? But it would be nice if he could sign it by tomorrow, by the 4th. He would like to do that, and maybe he will. They think he will do that. Democrats warn of devastating impacts on health care and food assistance, while Republicans defend it as necessary for fiscal and border priorities. Well, what is your take on that? Jeffries' marathon speech to bold stand on political stunt? Should this bill pass? 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. Gets into the studio for two-way talk and conversation. And don't forget our text line is up and running at 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. It appears on the screen here in real time, and we try to work it into the conversation. When we come back on the other side of the first break, Tom Donelson from the Donelson Files, which you can hear on the weekends here on AM 830 WCRN, and a senior fellow at the Frontiers of Freedom Institute out of D.C., where Tom and I both serve as senior fellows there. George Landreth, our president. We just had a recent addition, Scotty. She joined us. You've heard her. But we're going to take our first break here. We'll be back in 2 and 10, folks. So stick with us.
So I asked my clients, the most common response, Jerry does not try to be all things to all people. Boston Independence Group is specialized, focused solely on retirement planning. My customers enjoy the difference. We do one thing, and we do it exceptionally well. Help other people live better in retirement. That's it. If you're ready to retire or making plans to retire, we can do for you what we've done for hundreds of other retirees throughout New England. Live better in retirement. Just give me a call. I'll show you how. My toll-free number is 877-772-1776. Again, that number is 877-772-1776. And you can visit us on the web at bostonindependencegroup.com. bostonindependencegroup.com.
Tired of rush doctor's visits? Are you finding it tough to get a doctor's appointment? And when you finally do, are you in and out before you know it? Did your doctor take the time to ask about your diet or exercise routine? Did they order the right lab tests? And how do you know if these are the labs you need and how to interpret them? Discover the freedom of ordering your own lab tests. Phil George, clinical biochemist and health coach, can guide you on which blood tests to order. Customized to your personal health goals, Phil's extensive training ensures that you receive the best advice on interpreting your lab results and understanding their implications. Plus, by ordering labs on your own, you'll pay far below insurance prices. Looking for an alternative to conventional medicine? Phil George can help you navigate your health journey with a personalized approach. Just email Phil at philgeorge@charter.net for a free consultation. Your health and well-being are within reach, and it starts with the right guidance. Don't miss this opportunity to take control of your health. Reach out today and embark on a path to better health with Phil George.
Oh,
All right, folks, welcome back here to the second segment of the Thursday edition, July 3rd edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. And as promised, welcome into the conversation. Joining me is Tom Donelson from the Donelson Files and senior fellow at the Frontiers of Freedom Policy Institute. And Tom has
Yes.
been a dynamic voice in politics and sports, a senior fellow at the Frontiers of Freedom, president of America's PAC. Tom brings a sharp insight into research associate and consultant for the American Majority Foundation. Beyond the political arena, he's an accomplished real estate agent with Iowa Realty, specializing in short sales, residential properties, investments. A prolific author, Tom has penned 4 books on boxing, 2 on public policy, 1 on tennis, while freelancing for sites like Texas. Well, Tom, let me bring you in the conversation. You can tell us.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
well, I've been a freelance writer for so many publications, from National Review to TexasGOPvote.com, the Hollywood Republican, and so I probably would say I've penned about over 1,000 plus articles in my life. I'm in the 4 figures there. So, and
Wow.
like I said, and I've done, like I say, 9 books, including co-authored a book on tennis with my daughter, and my recent book, Since I'm Here,
Yes.
America
at the Abyss. I
Will
know
America-
this book. Will it survive? Will it
Will
survive?
it survive? And if you want to know the answer, you just have to buy the book.
You have to buy the book or
Have to
wait
buy
it out. One of the two. All right, folks, let's remind you, 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000 to get into the studio. Joe Mangiacotti, Tom Donelson here on this. Even though it's the 3rd, it's the 4th of July edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here at AM 830 WCRN Radio Central. Let's go to the phones. Mark has been waiting patiently. Hey, Mark, what say you? Happy 4th, sir.
Happy 4th of July, and happy 4th of July to your colleague. I read a statistic once, interesting statistic regarding the Revolutionary War. And according to this statistic, I found it to be somewhat remarkable. Only one third of the American population of the colonies at that time, we'll say when it was signed, the Declaration of Independence, only 30% were down with the revolution. Roughly 30% were ambivalent. They were fence walkers. And the other 30% were loyalists.
Yeah.
And yet they still managed to pull it off. It's a miracle that they did.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I've read this too. I've read it in history books. I've read it in articles. It was not the majority of the colonists. As a matter of fact, and there were some loyalists, right? King
Adios, amigo. Adios.
Okay. Adios. Thank you, Tom. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Happy 4th of July to you. Tom is the guest. So, Tom, on that, yeah, I think we've even talked about this in the past, because there were even people, Payne and so forth, that were actually loyalists to the king. And it was just the absolute tyranny of quartering troops in homes and destroying businesses, and just the overreach and the tyrannical type of behavior that actually pushed some more people over. But we did accomplish the American Revolution with a minority of patriots wanting this to happen. Your take on it?
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing. I mean, especially if you go in the Southern campaign of the Revolutionary War, the loyalists, it was almost as much a family feud as it was a revolution, in the sense that many of the loyalists were neighbors, friends, and maybe even family members of those who were patriots. And you essentially had a civil war within a revolutionary war. And you make an interesting point, and I think the caller does too, because when you look at it from this perspective, when we had this discussion, you and I, along with George and Scotty Hughes, most recently, and it was like Providence. If you sit back and you think of all the close calls, I mean, okay, for example, what was Chris Hughes, who's the husband of Scotty Hughes, and he's a military historian. He said we came very close to losing the Revolutionary War in Brooklyn, in the Battle of New York. I mean, it was basically there were two events. One was a suicide charge by a group of patriots to slow down the British advance, and the second you had a fog, which basically covered the Washington's ability to go across the river and escape. And
Tom, it would be actually worth doing a segment or even a show on all of the coincidences and things that have happened in both the revolution and then even subsequent, like the War of 1812 and stuff, where we had situations where Brits tried to burn or down our cities, including the White House at one time, and all of a sudden rain came and put fires out, almost as if God himself said, well, actually, we're not going to let that city burn. We're not. So there's been these incredible stories in our history, and whether you want to call it divine intervention or just one massive coincidence. But if we look at, several of these things, and you just made reference to the fog that provided cover, in essence, and allowed them to invisibly move through and cross the water. It's crazy when you look at it, that so many of these little things that happened that seemed like that you couldn't plan for, they weren't planned for, they were just a stroke of luck, could have changed the path and therefore the outcome.
Well, it's always interesting because you look at wars. I mean, the Battle of Midway is an interesting, speaking of Providence, because basically 5 minutes determined the battle. You literally had a 5-minute break where the dive bombers were able, and the reason why the dive bombers, and again, those days you didn't have, let's say, satellites imaging to tell you where to go. You essentially had a group of dive bombers follow a destroyer right straight into the aircraft carrier. And again, same thing in the Revolutionary War. I mean, you go look at crossing the Delaware, the risk they took in form. I mean, that could have easily been a disaster on a Christmas day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you just start. I mean, you look at the various little breaks that you had over the years, over that revolution.
And the other thing, because look. And folks, if you listen to the weekly report this weekend and Donelson files for that matter, because we do touch on a couple of things, especially George Washington, because he was such a phenomenal man and the right man for the right job. Everything from, self-limiting himself to the 2 terms, refusing the 3rd term, and quite frankly, Tom, by not even just as a military general in charge of the whole shebang, most guys, their egos and pride would have said, well, I can easily take command of this new country and stay in command of this new country.
Yep.
And he had the fortitude to only limit himself to the 2 and refuse. And of course, we don't even think, I don't think a lot of times we think about this, Tom, but we were setting all new things up, right? What do we call this person, right? We didn't want to call we came up with president.
and interesting, I just got, because I've been reading the last week or so, I've been reading a couple of books on ranking the presidents, and it was interesting that the title president was more of a it was kind of like the best, what they kind of viewed as the best option. It was the least threatening.
Yes.
I mean, example, because, and certainly when you look like John Adams, basically said, "Your ex," I mean, he had like a 20-word description of how to greet the president. And George Washington just call me the president of the United States. That'll be fine. Yeah. And we were lucky. I mean, here's the thing. We were lucky in a way that of all the people that a revolution could have as the general, and then finally as your first president, we couldn't have asked for a better person than George Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. I read a book like when I was probably a teenager, and it was, my mother had it in the reading room in the house, which means the bathroom, right? So it was in the bookshelf in the bathroom. And so I read this about first ladies, which I thought was a fascinating book. And of course, this is like almost 50 years ago I read this book, but it was, it talked about the fact that I don't think a lot of us realize that most presidents actually married up. right? Very few, like maybe Jacqueline, Bouvier Kennedy married up, but excuse me, most presidents married up. They married women who were higher in society, including Lincoln did, right? The daughter of a big publisher. Look, Lyndon Baines Johnson, right? BFI. Everybody, most presidents, including George Washington, who married the widow Curtis. And, there were stories about when Washington was negotiating with a farmer for land to build the Capitol, the D.C., Washington, D.C. This farmer, aggravated with the negotiations, stormed out of the meeting saying to George Washington, "You'd be nothing if you didn't marry the widow Curtis's money." And so this has become something. But in the book about the first ladies, on the first official gathering of the new government and the president and first lady, they didn't want to duplicate the monarchy. They didn't want to act like he was a king. And they didn't. What is the etiquette? They're coming from, these were all loyal subjects of the crown prior to this, right? Yeah. So it was Martha Washington who realized, we don't know how to end this, right? We don't know how to end the evening. So she's stood up in this room, in the gathering, and said that the general, as she referred to him at the point, still, the general often will retire shortly after I do. And at that point, she excused herself and said she's retiring for the evening. She set it up so that everybody understood, well, that means he retires shortly now, so we should start saying our goodbyes. And that kind of became, how she handled it. So we got to look to the first ladies, I think. It's a great book, and maybe I'll go back and reread this book. But it's amazing how many roles the first lady played. And, we had a bachelor president, right? Do you remember who that was?
Yeah, James Buchanan.
And who served as first lady? His niece. His niece stepped in, and there's a great story about her being, of course, courted by all these, young gentlemen that, married the first lady. I mean, how often do you have that scenario? And she took a walk on the beach, and they picked up some pebbles, and then he fashioned the pebbles with diamonds into a bracelet. And when she asked her uncle if she could keep something that a gentleman caller gave her, he said, "Well, what is it?" "It's just a few pebbles that he fashioned into a bracelet." He said, "Sure, of course." She left out the diamonds part of it. But, hey, folks, we're coming up on our mid-show break here. Tom Donelson is joining me on this special edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN, reminding you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000, 508-871-7000. Hey, stick with us. We will be back in 10, folks.
An Independence Group Weather Center. Call Jerry Doherty today at 877-772-1776. Retirement is within reach.
I'm meteorologist Vicki Graff, and here's your latest Boston 25 weather on Radio 830 WCRN. After a stormy afternoon, we'll clear things out before
commercials going out over the air on the station. We're still streaming live.
Upper 50s in some spots.
Come back.
Through our Friday.
Wanted to touch
the 4th of July is looking fantastic with sunshine, low 80s, and lower humidity. We'll hold on to dry weather, but heating up as we head into the weekend. I'm Vicki Graff, and you can hear Boston 25 live for the morning drive weekdays on AM 830 WCRN.
By DHS.
Whatever you want to go.
Live and local radio is next. Yeah. Stay tuned to Radio Central 830.
Looking for a fuel and food stop that truly stands out? Experience the Yatco difference. At Yatco, we're dedicated to bringing you the best customer service, the highest quality products, and a commitment to making your life on the go easier. Yatco has 15 convenient locations across central Massachusetts, and now our newest spot at 75 Quonsigamut Ave in Worcester. Yatco, where every stop keeps you going.
Hi, I'm Dr. Eddie Arus with the Vascular Care Group. If knee pain is making everyday activities feel like a struggle, and you've been told your only option for relief is major surgery, think again. Genicular artery embolization is a non-surgical outpatient treatment that can dramatically reduce pain and improve mobility. It targets the inflammation that's causing your arthritis knee pain and best of all, it's performed right in our office. To learn more about living the pain-free life, visit thevascularcaregroup.com with offices in Worcester and Sturbridge, Massachusetts.
Well, welcome back here to the second half of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN, where you can join the conversation for the remainder of the hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Lines open and available today back at HQ. So he'll get you set up and into the studio for two-way talk and conversation. In the virtual studio with me as I broadcast from the Cameo Studios is Tom Donelson, a senior fellow with the Frontiers of Freedom Institute, a profound author with, I didn't realize you had that many books, actually, much less. Yeah. I did not even realize you had a book on tennis. Till today, Tom. Yes. But America Abyss, Will America Survive, of course, is your latest book. And tell people where they can get that, actually.
Well, you can get this book at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and other areas where you can find books online.
Sure.
And if you don't see the book in your bookstore, order two. One for yourself, one for a friend.
It's a great gift coming up. There's a lot to fit in, a lot going on. We talked about, there's a pretty good chance this is the big, beautiful bill, 3XB, as I say, call it, will pass the House today in the version that got sent back from the Senate. It will go to Trump's desk, and even if it went back there today, I think he'll probably do a big presser tomorrow on the actual 4th of July. But Tom, I wanted to talk about this, and you, as we just pointed out earlier in the show, have written several books on sports and big sports fan here. And this was kind of surprising that the Supreme Court picked up this case on transgender athlete bans. So the court will hear arguments on state laws in Idaho and West Virginia that ban transgender athletes from participating in girls and women's sports teams. Now, it's July. Normally the court, right, here's the cases. Within June is the Supreme Court. They let all their decisions out. So this is kind of I didn't see this one coming. This case could set a major precedent on transgender rights in school athletics. Idaho's 2020 Fairness and Women's Sports Act was the first state law to ban transgender women and girls from competing on female sport teams in public schools and colleges. And West Virginia's 2021 Save Women's Sports Act similarly restricts transgender athletes, defining eligibility based on biological sex at birth. Now, the court will decide if these bans violate federal laws, including Title IX, which prohibits sex-based discrimination in education on the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. And the lower courts have ruled these laws discriminatory. But the state argues that they protect the fairness in women's sports. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson highlights the case as part of a broader debate on balancing transgender inclusion with competitive fairness, and advocates for the bans, including state officials, argue that they ensure a level playing field for female athletes. And opponents, like the ACLU, argue the bans discriminate against transgender youth, limiting their access to sports. Now, Tom, I think that we have to get down to what I think is so obvious, and the basic thing here is, because you identify as a female, it does not change your chromosomes. It does not change your biological sex. And that is the point, that all of a sudden we're being forced. And again, I always bring this back to the free speech, right? We can say whatever we want short of fire in a theater, but free speech also means you can't be forced to say something you don't want to. And I think this is very Orwellian, for all of a sudden somebody decided that female now can mean a biological man who just says they're female. And if we have to reject that premise, because if you accept the premise, then this makes sense. But if we reject the premise that a biological man, meaning somebody who has the pubertic type of advantages, larger lungs, larger heart, bigger reach, more muscle mass, all of the things that give a biological male advantages in sports is in fact true, and that therefore, why have the two sports? But your take on this, Tom, both as political speaker and a sports expert.
Well, I'm going to go great. Here's the problem you run into. You make a good first point is this, and that is there's a difference between men and women in sports. That should not really be all that disputable.
No surprise.
Yeah, surprise. I mean, I'm always, like Serena Williams, basically played like one time in a game that's the 200th best men's player and got beat. And if you so when you look at it from athlete, best women versus the best men in their respective sports, there's a significant difference. And maybe the question comes into play is when we talk about the word discrimination. Title IX was specifically designed to help women in sports, and the idea that it would be inclusive of, let's say, a man, declared himself a woman and participating. And I think it's interesting enough that the University of Pennsylvania pretty much called uncle when they recently, when they basically took away all of the accolades that any male won, in particular Leah Thomas, won, competing on those women's sports. So it's going to be very interesting because it comes down to what is Title IX, or to the infamous question during the Judge Jackson's hearing. What is a woman? I mean, that's and that to me. And here's the thing: that to me was one of the most significant answers that people, to this day, we mock it, we kind of laugh at it. But I think this was Jackson's way of saying, I'm not going to make a statement on this because I'm going to have to deal with this on the courts.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, she was basically, in effect, hinting where she's going to go with this. And I think people.
Here's my point on Jackson, Justice Jackson, by the way. Because of that answer during the confirmation hearings, I think she should have to recuse herself from this case, because if you can't define what a woman, and how can you possibly rule on this? Right? So I don't think she's qualified to even be one of the.
Well, I'm going to put it this way. The answer is you make a very good point, but I truly believe to this day that this was one of those answers that she left ambiguous for a reason. One, I'm going to have to rule at this in a court in the future. She knew that this is going to come before the Supreme Court. This was her way of saying, I'm not going to decide at this moment. I'm going to listen to the experts, quote unquote. That was her out.
Yeah.
That was her out. And that's also her out when she rules one way or the other. She's going to say, this expert says this.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. And so that's why I think it's going to be, that's why I think this was one of the most significant answers, because it was her way of hinting which way she's going to go.
And on the broader context here, folks, see, over 27 states have passed similar laws restricting transgender athletes, reflecting a national debate. And it was inevitable. We all, I think, agreed and understood that eventually the court was going to have to take this up. I think it's just a little bit of a surprise that got announced today. And the Supreme Court's conservative majority has recently upheld a Tennessee ban on gender-affirming care for minors, which may influence this case as well. And a decision's expected sometime in the summer, potentially reshaping school sports and policies nationwide. So the court's fall term begins in October with arguments to be scheduled. Listeners, what do you think? 508-871-7000. Should states have the right to set the rules, or do these bans unfairly target transgender students?
Yeah, the other thing too, they also made a recent ruling dealing with parents having a right to opt out.
Yes.
And I think that it was, again, that was a 6-3 decision. That was, again, it's basically taking the side of the parents, but that kind of goes right into the transgender issue, because that's essentially one of the aspects that you could opt out of.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a break in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to get this in because a while ago, Jaguar, right now, as you know, Tom, and a lot of listeners know, I have collected cars over the years, and I'm a big Jaguar fan. Always have been. There's been times when I've had as many as 4 Jaguars of different decades at one given time. I love the classic Jag look. They're a wonderful car. The joke was, up until Ford bought them, is you always had to have two Jags because one was always in the shop. They had notorious electrical problems, but they have recently gone woke, right? Their rebrand, and that has basically collapsed. And for those that didn't see it, and for those of those streaming, I'm going to put up an example, so an overlay right now. This is how they went, Tom, with their new woke.
Yes, I remember I remember the ad.
Yeah, remember this ad. So for those, if you'd like to go to my Facebook page, station Facebook page, YouTube channel, LinkedIn profile, or Rumble, you'll see what I put up there. But the point being that Jaguar has tried this and has failed. Now, Jaguar registered 49 vehicles in Europe in April of this year. That's down from almost 2,000 the previous year. It's a 97.5% drop, according to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. And global sales of Jaguar fell to 26,800 units in fiscal 24-25. That's an 85% decline from 180,800 in 2018, leaving Jaguar with just a 0.1% market share in UK and Australia. And here's the thing, they're going to electric. Jaguars, and like I said, Ford bought Jaguar, I think it was 95, and Ford had a big R&D department, and they got rid of the electrical issue. They kept the two tanks for a while. I've never owned a Jaguar newer than I think 2000 because they started selling off to a Swedish group, and I don't even know who owns Jaguar today. Volvo, I think it did at one time, but I like the classic Jags, of course, the original. I've had 84s, I've had a 66, I've had them all over the decades. I think that they have just classic, sleek look. Like even the Rolls Royce is a masterpiece art wise. So here's another thing: is it true, Tom? You go woke, you go broke. We could ask Jaguar and Budweiser in a few.
Well, I mean, here's the deal. I mean, Budweiser was smart enough to realize, boy, did we step into this one. I mean, they went from was it Mulaney with that,
Dylan Mulvaney,
Dylan Mulvaney to the Manning brothers.
Yeah.
That was kind of a quick turn, but I mean, they understood very quickly. Well, this didn't work. And in the case of Jaguar, I mean, look, I always view Jaguar as that's the cool car.
James Bond, cool.
It's one of those cars you look. I mean, this is where the cool guys wear, the rich cool guys, who have women on each.
We're going to break. We're against the clock, unfortunately, folks. So stick with us. We'll come back to the fourth and final segment on a special edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show. We're back in 2 and 10.
Hi, folks. This is Mike Stacey, head professional at Norton Country Club, welcoming you to the start of the 2025 golf season. Norton Country Club is a championship 18-hole golf course located just minutes off of 485. The course came through the winter grade, and we're open for daily fee, as well as having membership opportunities and outings available. Our clubhouse is a great venue for your wedding or group gathering needs. If you're interested, call 508-285-2400, extension 1 for events, or 103 for golf, as well as nortoncountryclub.com. Hope to see you out there.
Hi, I'm Dr. Eddie Arus with the Vascular Care Group. If knee pain is making everyday activities feel like a struggle, and you've been told your only option for relief is major surgery, think again. Genicular artery embolization is a non-surgical outpatient treatment that can dramatically reduce pain and improve mobility. It targets the inflammation that's causing your arthritis knee pain, and best of all, is performed right in our office. To learn more about living the pain-free life, visit thevascularcaregroup.com with offices in Worcester and Sturbridge, Massachusetts.
Building AI Boston is a tech talk for everyone. Listen in to find out why you belong in the conversations shaping our future every Thursday morning, 10:30 Eastern Time on Radio Central AM 830 WCRN.
Every person is entitled to 30 fundamental human rights, and you only need to do one thing to enjoy all of them. Know them. Get your free human rights booklet today. Go to humanrights.com.
Hi, I'm Lee Gaudette of the Gaudette Insurance Agency, a third-generation family business based in Whitensville with branch office locations in Grafton, Shrewsbury, Westboro, and Southborough. We are a full-service independent agency offering all aspects of insurance to businesses, families, and individuals. We are in the peace of mind business. Call, click, or come in to see us at any of our locations for a free assessment of your insurance needs. Also, listen to Radio Central WCRN every Friday morning at 9:30 for the Gaudette Insurance Show.
All right, folks, welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on this special 4th of July edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show at AM 830 WCRN, where you can join the conversation for the remainder of this hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Reminding you, folks, you can also always stream. You can stream it, of course, on the TuneIn app, but you can watch and listen on Facebook, X, LinkedIn profile, my social media platforms at Joe Mangi, M-A-N-G-I, Joe Mangi Show, as well as the Joe Mangiacotti Show channel on Rumble. So join us viewing in the virtual studio with me, Tom Donelson, senior fellow at the Frontiers of Freedom Institute out of D.C., author and radio host as well. And Tom, we could have gone for a very, very long time here with the anniversary and so forth. But one of the things I did want to touch on before we had to wrap up today's show is that the Democrats are blocking Medicaid investigations. And earlier in the show, and I know I've made reference to this over and over again, folks, listeners I'm talking to, is Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, right? The food stamps, so much fraud in this. But 20 Democrat-led states have spearheaded by California, they're suing the Department of Homeland Security to stop an investigation into whether Medicaid funds are being used for undocumented migrants. Where do you get off doing that? What's the thought process to say we're going to sue you from doing your job and investigating fraud that's taking money out of the American taxpayer? The lawsuit claims the probe violates the privacy of Medicaid recipients. It creates a culture of fear. Now, if the fear that it creates is you committing fraud, right, and getting benefits and or money that you're not entitled to, yes, that's a healthy fear you should have. And of course, you got AOC out there, and she stated on X that not one federal dollar goes to providing Medicaid to undocumented immigrants. But see, Congressional Budget Office estimates that there's 1.4 million undocumented immigrants could be removed from Medicaid rolls under proposed policy change. And that leads us back to this Hakeem Jeffries grandstanding that he's doing right now, Tom. And he's talking about, these bills are going to cut Medicaid. Yeah, it's designed to cut the 1.4 million people, undocumented people that have no right to that Medicaid.
Well, yeah. I would say there's a part of me that says perplexed why you would, die on this hill, but on the other side of the equation,
on any of the hills they're choosing, it makes no sense, right?
But on the other side,
defend the rapist, gangbanger, human trafficker,
But on the other side of the equation, I guess you got to protect your voter base.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the bottom line. What they're really
all right, but let's dive down to that for a second, because the irony here is protect your voter base of people who actually vote for you. But if they're undocumented, then they shouldn't be voting for you, which brings into this whole debate as to how the hell of non-citizens actually voting in elections. And yes, they are. There are enough, because remember the left used to say there's no voter fraud going on. Well, let's look at all these examples. All right. Well, there's a little fraud going on, but not enough to change things. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Let's look at all of this. And if this had changed, it could have changed the outlet. So, yes.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing comes into play. I'm being facetious, but here's the bottom line: is what the Democrats are really trying to do is they're trying to hide the number of undocumented illegal immigrants in their state, knowing full well that if we had an idea how many in there, like California is a good classic example, it also makes a difference on the census. It makes a difference on again, spending money, but it also makes a difference on so many areas that in effect, what they're trying to do is we don't want you to know the truth. about the number of illegal immigrants in our state. That's what the real game is.
Yeah.
It's nil. It's, this is just a benefit. As long as we can figure out a way to get them money, they can, as opposed to self-deporting, they stick around. But the reality is they don't want to know. And it's also when you start asking the question, why don't you want voter ID? Why don't you want people to be able to demonstrate that they're actual U.S. citizens making the ballots?
No, absolutely. Right. Blocking DHH investigations could hide all the evidence, right, that contradicts that public stand that Medicaid isn't used for undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
Now, the lawsuit is following Trump's administration's push to scrutinize entitlement programs. And, whether you want to look at what Doge has turned out or just the fact that Trump has kind of been saying this since he came down the escalator, part of the broader efforts is to curb benefits for non-citizens. Of course it is. Now, the CBO warns that proposed cuts could lead to 11.8 million Americans losing health insurance over a decade. The question becomes, again, who's losing it? Are they supposed to have it? Are they supposed to have it in the first place? That is the point. And it ties all back into, Tom, your point as to hiding who has it, how many there are on this. And of course, I mean, to bring this suit on the 4th of July weekend is crazy. But this could set a precedent for how states handle federal oversight of Medicaid spending and immigration enforcement. And the outcome may influence public trust in the entitlement programs and fuel the ongoing debate over immigration policy. I hope it does.
Well, the thing, like I say, it comes down to they want to hide the fact that they're doing it, and they want to hide the fact that there's other benefits, not the least of which, how many of these people are on voter rolls.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago, there was a group that went into the state of Virginia, and they basically found that, in selected district, they could find literally, a high, there was a significant percentage of illegal on the voter rolls, and those that voted in multiple elections. Yeah. So it's there. It's omnipresent. We may not know the true number of it. There's been, I've seen estimates myself. I remember for a period of 3 or 4 years, we actually polled over 100,000 voters, and we literally had people admit to our pollsters, "Oh yeah, I'm a non-citizen voting."
Yeah.
Which
because again, when there's no fear of consequences, then this is what happens. And I've talked about this as far as immigration goes. If you want to stop illegal immigration, the way Trump has done it, but why has it stopped? The reason we have record lows now and record secured is because, unlike the perception that was projected under the Biden administration, going all the way back to the 2019 Democratic debate, where everybody on this stage raised their hands to free medical to illegals, and Biden saying, if you come here, we aren't going to send you back. Well, now that was the message that was projected all around the world. And now what's being projected? They see some of these bad hombres being sent off to CCOT. We have a million people have self-deported themselves because they know that if they get caught and deported, they can never come back. I want to shift gears for a second because, here in my backyard, Tom, Harvard has been in this cat and mouse game here with the Trump administration, the $1 billion clash with Trump, if you will, because Harvard University could lose about $1 billion a year if President Trump's threats to cut federal research funding, student aid, and increase endowment taxes are actually realized. Now, the shortfall threatens Harvard's $6.4 billion annual operating budget, despite its massive $53 billion endowment. In the Trump administration, they've frozen $2.3 billion in federal funding, including $2.2 billion in research grants, $60 million in contracts, citing Harvard's alleged failure to address the blatant anti-Semitism on that campus. And additional threats include banning international student enrollment and revoking Harvard's tax-exempt status, which could cost millions. And nearly half of Harvard's $1.5 billion annual research budget comes from federal funds supporting work like Alzheimer's research and cancer immunotherapy, things like that. Now, the funding freeze jeopardizes projects that Harvard has at the medical school and affiliated hospitals like Mass General and Dana-Farber. But Congress, or the Republicans, or the congressional Republicans, that is, are considering raising the endowment tax from 1.4% to 8%. Now, that could cost Harvard hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And according to the Wall Street Journal, folks, it estimates about $90 million loss from the reduced international student tuition and a $20 million loss in federal student aid. The thing is, should Harvard, first of all, I have always wondered why universities and schools can have that amount of land tax-free. Now, often they pay some kind of stipend. I know Harvard does pay to Cambridge a flat amount instead of taxes and that nature. But when these schools continually raise their tuitions, Tom, and it's very management heavy, right? They have tons of administrators. We're not talking about teachers. We see Elizabeth Warren getting something like $380,000 to teach one course at Harvard, and I think this all comes down to when we started issuing the loans so easily, student loans, and it was just like car companies when we did the stimulus check several years ago, right? I saw banners at used car lots saying, "Hey, come on in. We know you have $1,200 to put down." So as soon as the school realized that these students had access to money, college education costs went through the roof.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the incentive is to increase costs on the students, not to decrease costs on the students, which leads me to a very interesting point. Hillsdale College years ago said, we're not going to take any federal funding. Then we don't have to worry about, some of these conditions. If I'm Harvard, if you want to be an anti-Semitic, racist, Jew-hating Marxist university, fine. Advertisers,
any tax money.
Tax money. Hey, you got a $53 billion endowment. You don't need, you can just simply say, we're out of here. We're not going to depend on it. And we're going to run the school the way we want to run it. Just like Hillsdale College. I don't see why they don't do that. Yeah. And let's not forget, Bob Jones pretty much lost their funding over cases in the 1970s and 80s due to what would be considered racism.
Tom, this is going to wrap up the July 4th edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show. Thank you for happy 4th of July to you.
Happy 4th of July to you and your staff.
Big cookout and hamburgers and hot dogs and all. So enjoy it, and people can join us for the weekly report tomorrow afternoon and Sunday afternoon. Donelson Files on Sunday as well. Tom, thank you for joining us. All right, folks, that will wrap up today's and this week's Out with Joe. Wow, that was a throwback to an old dining show. The Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Hey, have a fantastic 4th of July, folks. Joe out.
This is WCRN Worcester.